She stared out the window, watching a sparrow land on the garden fence. "You're free to go wherever you please," she murmured softly, as if speaking to the bird, or perhaps to herself. Behind her, the soft click of polished shoes on hardwood broke the silence. A tall man with silver-streaked hair stepped inside, his eyes warm but weary beneath wire-rimmed glasses. He carried 2 steaming mugs now, offering one to her with a gentle smile. Still brooding over that scholarship rejection, "My little storm cloud," he asked, his voice rich with the cadence of someone who'd spent decades choosing kindness over convenience. Clara looked up, her hazel eyes shimmering. "It wasn't just any scholarship, Dad. It was the one in Lisbon, the one Mom always talked about before." She trailed off, her hand brushing the locket at her throat. The only thing she had left of her mother, who'd vanished far too soon into illness and quiet hospital rooms. Her father, Charles Everly, sat beside her. Not too close, not too far. Just enough space to let her breathe. "I know," he said quietly. "And I also know you worked harder than anyone I've ever seen for it. I wanted to prove I could stand on my own," she whispered. "Not as Charles Everly's daughter, just Clara." He studied her for a long moment, his expression softening like dawn breaking through fog. "You've always stood on your own, sweetheart. Wealth may open doors, but it's your heart that walks through them." A tear slipped down her cheek, and she didn't wipe it away. "Sometimes I feel like everyone sees the name, the bank accounts, the headlines, but no one sees me." Charles reached over, his calloused hand, still strong despite his 70 years, covering hers. "Then let them keep looking. And when the right person finally sees you, truly sees you, you'll know." Clara leaned into him, just slightly, as if drawing strength from his quiet certainty. Outside, the wind picked up, sending another whirl of amber leaves into the sky. And in that moment, wrapped in the safety of her father's presence, she felt something stir within her. Not ambition, not rebellion, but a fragile, flickering hope. She didn't know it yet, but that hope would carry her through storms she couldn't imagine, through gilded cages and hollow smiles, through nights when she'd clutch her belly and whisper to the life growing inside her, "We'll be okay. We have to be." But for now, in this quiet room filled with the scent of bergamot and old paper, she was just Clara, loved, seen, and whole. And that was enough, because sometimes the strongest foundations aren't built on money or status, but on the unwavering belief that you are worthy simply because you exist. Charles squeezed her hand once more before rising. "Come on," he said, his voice light again. "Let's go feed the koi. They miss your laughter." Clara smiled, a real one this time, and followed him out into the garden, the cold teacup forgotten on the table. What she didn't know was that soon, someone would walk into her life promising her the world, while slowly stealing her voice. But that story hadn't begun yet. For now, there was only the sunlight, silence, and the steady, beating heart of a F. Adrian Lockwood. He wasn't handsome in the traditional sense. His jaw was too sharp, his smile too calculated. But there was something about him that made people lean in when he spoke. A magnetism not of warmth, but of control, of certainty. And in a world drowning in noise, certainty was currency. He adjusted the cufflinks on his tailored navy suit, platinum, engraved with his initials, and finally took a sip. The burn traveled down his throat like a secret he'd long grown used to swallowing. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Lockwood, the Everly Foundation Gala is in 2 hours. Your driver is ready." Adrian didn't answer right away. Instead, he turned from the window and walked to a framed photo on his desk. Himself at 22, standing beside his father at the ribbon cutting of their first failing factory. The man's hand rested heavily on Adrian's shoulder, not in pride, but in warning. "You think money buys respect? Boy, no. It buys silence. And silence can be louder than applause." That memory still lived in his bones. He set the glass down with a quiet click. "Cancel the driver," he said into the intercom. "I'll take the Aston." Minutes later, engine purring like a satisfied predator, Adrian drove through the rain-slicked streets, his reflection flickering in shop windows. Always alone, always watching himself. At the gala, crystal chandeliers cast pools of gold over champagne flutes and practiced laughter. He moved through the crowd like a ghost who'd learned how to wear skin. Shaking hands, exchanging pleasantries, eyes scanning for leverage, for weakness, for opportunity. And then he saw her, Clara Everly. She stood near a marble column, not posing, not performing, just being. Her dress was simple ivory silk. No jewels, just that locket again, catching the light like a heartbeat. She was listening, truly listening, to an elderly philanthropist. Her head tilted slightly, eyes soft with attention. Adrian felt something unfamiliar tighten in his chest. Not desire, not yet, recognition. Here was someone who didn't need to prove anything, who carried quiet in her bones like armor. Before he could second-guess himself, he was beside her. "Miss Everly," he said, voice lower than intended. "I've read your essay on ethical philanthropy. You called legacy a debt to the future." Bold words. She turned, startled but not startled away. Her eyes, those warm, searching hazel eyes, met his without flinching. "Only if you believe the past has a conscience, Mr. Lockwood." He almost smiled. "I don't believe in conscience. I believe in consequence." "And yet," she said gently, "you're here, at a charity gala. Why a beat of silence?" Rain tapped against the stained glass skylight above them. "Maybe I'm tired of being the consequence," he admitted, so quietly only she could hear. For the first time in years, Adrian felt seen. Not as the heir to a crumbling empire rebuilt through ruthless deals, not as the man who closed factories and opened offshore accounts, but as someone trying. Later that night, over bitter espresso in a nearly empty lounge, he told her about his father's debts, his mother's quiet departure, the years he spent clawing his way out of shame. "I built something from nothing," he said, not bragging, confessing. "But sometimes I wonder, if the foundation is made of sand, does the height even matter?" Clara stirred her coffee, thoughtful. "Maybe the foundation isn't sand," she said. "Maybe it's just waiting for someone to plant something real in it." He looked at her then. Not at her name, not at her father's fortune, but at the way her fingers trembled slightly when she spoke about justice, about children who never got a chance. At the way she bit her lip when she was nervous, like she was doing right now. And for the first time, Adrian didn't want to win. He wanted to belong. "What if I asked you to dinner?" he said suddenly. "Not as Charles Everly's daughter. Not as Adrian Lockwood, the tycoon. Just as." She studied him, the silence stretching like a held breath. Then, softly, "Only if you promise to be honest. Even when it's uncomfortable." He almost laughed. Honesty had cost him everything once. But looking at her, this woman who saw truth as a gift, not a weapon, he nodded. "I promise." He didn't know then that promises made in moments of vulnerability are the hardest to keep. Or that the very thing he craved, her belief in him, would one day become the chain he used to bind her. But tonight, under the hum of city lights and the scent of rain on stone, Adrian Lockwood allowed himself to hope. Not for power, not for control, just each other. Without knowing the quiet tremors beneath the surface, Clara stood beneath the arbor, her dress simple but luminous, her hands steady, though her heart galloped like a startled deer. She looked at Adrian, and for a moment, she let herself believe in forever. He took her hands, his voice low, intimate, meant only for her. "You're the first good thing I've ever truly earned," he murmured, eyes glistening with something she mistook for love. And she believed him, because in that moment he felt real. The late-night talks, the handwritten notes slipped into her coat pockets, the way he'd waited outside her father's office for 2 hours just to apologize after a misstep, those felt real too. But even dreams have shadows. The first fissure came 3 weeks after the honeymoon. They were in their new home, a sleek, minimalist mansion Adrian insisted was efficient, when Clara excitedly showed him ultrasound photos from her routine checkup. "Look," she said, voice trembling with joy. The technician said the heartbeat is strong. "Perfect." Adrian barely glanced up from his tablet. "Good. Just don't post it online." The press already thinks you're fragile enough. Clara blinked. I wasn't going to. I just wanted to share it with you. He finally looked at her, his expression softening, but not quite reaching his eyes. I know, my love, and I appreciate it, but we have to be careful. Your father's name, my reputation, everything is under a microscope. She nodded slowly, folding the image back into her pocket, the warmth of her joy cooling like tea left too long in the rain. Then came the dinners with his business associates, where Clara sat quietly while Adrian spoke for her. Clara's taking a step back from her advocacy work, he'd say with a proud smile. She's focusing on being a mother now. Such a wise choice. She never corrected him. Not in front of them, but later, in the dim glow of their bedroom, she whispered, I never said I was quitting. I just wanted to pause until the baby comes. Adrian turned to her, his face a mask of concern. Are you saying you don't want to be a full-time mother after everything we've planned? It wasn't a question. It was a trap wrapped in velvet. I want to be both, she said carefully. A mother and myself. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. You don't understand how the world sees you, Clara. They'll say I'm controlling you if you keep working. Or worse, that you're neglecting your child. Do you want that headline? Her throat tightened. No. But I also don't want to disappear. You won't disappear, he said, pulling her close, his voice gentle again. The voice that had first disarmed her. You'll just shift, like a river changing course. Still flowing. Just quieter. And because she loved him, because she wanted to believe in the man who'd once called her his second chance. She let the current pull her under. But the silence grew heavier with each passing week. He began scheduling her appointments without consulting her. I've arranged for Dr. Langley. He's the best. You don't need that midwife you liked. He removed her from group chats with her university friends. They're negative influences, always complaining about privilege. You're above that now. He even asked her to stop calling her father so often. He worries too much, and it makes me look like I can't take care of you. Each request came wrapped in care, in logic, in what's best for the baby, and each one carved away a piece of her. Still, she held on, because wasn't this what love sometimes was? Compromise, sacrifice. Then came the night of the charity dinner. Clara had spent hours choosing a dress that made her feel like herself. Not just Adrian's wife, not just the expectant mother, but Clara. She pinned her hair up, dabbed rose oil behind her ears, the way her mother used to, and stepped into the hallway with a quiet smile. Adrian took one look and frowned. That neckline. It's a bit much, don't you think? Her smile faltered. It's modest. Barely shows anything. Modest to you, he said, stepping closer, voice dropping to that tone. Soft, reasonable, suffocating. But people will talk, especially now that you're showing. She glanced down at her small baby bump, barely visible beneath the fabric. A wave of nausea, not from pregnancy, but from shame, rose in her throat. I'll change, she whispered. He kissed her forehead, relieved. Good girl. And just like that, the woman who once wrote essays about justice stood in front of her mirror and unzipped the dress that had made her feel alive, replacing it with something safe, something silent. But as she smoothed the new fabric over her hips, something shifted deep inside her. Not the baby, but her. A quiet ember of doubt flared into a question she couldn't unask. If I keep giving pieces of myself away, will there be anything left when my child is born? Outside, rain began to fall, soft at first, then insistent against the glass. And somewhere, far away, her father sat alone in his study, staring at his silent phone, wondering why his daughter's voice had grown so thin on their weekly calls. The wedding photos still hung in the hall, smiling, radiant, eternal. Stirred. Her hand rested gently on the curve of her belly, now unmistakable beneath her cotton nightgown. 6 months along. And yet, instead of joy, a quiet dread coiled in her chest like a sleeping serpent. She remembered the first flutter, the tiny, magical kick that had made her cry with wonder. She'd rushed to tell Adrian, breathless, eyes shining. It moved. she'd whispered, pulling his hand to her stomach. He'd smiled, yes, but his fingers had been stiff, his gaze already drifting to his phone. That's good. Just don't overreact. Babies move all the time. Overreact. The word echoed in her mind now as she watched dust motes dance in the light. She hadn't imagined it. The shift in him after the pregnancy test turned positive. At first, it was subtle, fewer kisses, more critiques. You're eating too much sugar. That yoga class is too strenuous. Why are you crying over a commercial? But lately, it had deepened into something colder. A performance of care that left her feeling watched, not loved. Downstairs, the espresso machine hissed to life. Adrian was already up. By the time she joined him in the kitchen, he was dressed in a charcoal suit, scrolling through emails, his posture rigid with purpose. He glanced up, eyes narrowing slightly as he took her in. You're wearing that, she looked down. Just soft linen pants and a loose sweater, comfortable, breathable. Yes, the doctor said to avoid tight clothes. He set his cup down with deliberate calm. Clara, we have the board review today. My investors will be there. Don't you think you should try to look a little more put together for my sake? Her breath hitched. I am put together. I'm also 6 months pregnant. And his tone sharpened, just a fraction. You think pregnancy excuses you from basic professionalism from supporting me? I am supporting you, she said, voice trembling but firm. Every day. But I'm also carrying your child. Can't I be both without being monitored for a heartbeat? Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. Then Adrian exhaled slowly, stepping closer. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheekbone with practiced tenderness. I'm not monitoring you, my love. I'm protecting you. The world isn't kind to women who lose control, especially not when they're carrying an heir. An heir, not a baby, not our child. An heir. The word landed like a stone in her stomach. Before she could respond, he kissed her forehead and turned toward the door. Wear the navy dress, the one with the high collar. You look dignified in it. Then he was gone, the front door clicking shut behind him with finality. Clara stood frozen, her hands still on her belly, tears blurring her vision. But then, a soft, insistent pressure from within. Kick, strong, certain. She gasped, pressing both palms to her stomach. You felt that too, didn't you? She whispered. You know something's wrong. Later that afternoon, alone in the library, Adrian's quiet room, where even footsteps felt too loud, she scrolled through old photos on her phone. Her graduation, her volunteering in Lisbon, her laughing with her father on a beach in Cornwall. She barely recognized that woman now. A soft knock startled her. It was Maria, the housekeeper, a quiet woman in her 50s who'd worked for Adrian's family for years. Miss Clara, she said gently, holding out a small package wrapped in brown paper. This came for you. No return address. Frowning, Clara took it. Inside was a children's book, The Little Star Who Found Her Voice, and a note in her father's handwriting, even the quietest light can guide someone home. Don't let anyone convince you your voice is too small. Dad, tears spilled over, not just from sadness, but from the sudden, overwhelming realization that someone still saw her. Someone still knew her. She clutched the book to her chest, her breath shuddering. That night, Adrian returned later than usual, his mood stormy. He barely greeted her before pouring a drink. You didn't wear the dress, he said flatly. I wasn't going out, she replied, folding laundry with steady hands. You could have at least tried to look presentable for dinner. I am presentable, she said, meeting his eyes for the first time in weeks without flinching. I'm just not your display piece. The glass in his hand stilled. His expression didn't twist in anger. It went eerily calm. Dangerous. Careful, Clara, he said softly. You're sounding like your father. And look where that got him. Lonely, paranoid, clinging to a daughter he can't control. Her blood ran cold. Don't you ever speak about my father like that, she whispered. He stepped closer, voice dropping to a velvet threat. Then stop giving me reasons to worry. Stop hiding things. Stop acting like I'm your enemy. I wouldn't have to hide if you'd let me breathe, she said, tears finally falling. I'm scared, Adrian. Not of the baby. Of becoming someone I don't recognize. For the first time, something flickered in his eyes, doubt, regret, but it vanished as quickly as it came. Fear is natural, he said, turning away, but trust is a choice, and I need you to choose me, every day. He walked out, leaving her standing alone in the dim light, one hand on her belly, the other clutching her father's book like a lifeline. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, and Clara, for the first time, allowed herself to wonder, what if I chose me? The question didn't bring relief. It brought terror, because she knew, deep in her marrow, that choosing herself might mean losing everything, or finally coming home to herself. Adrian entered the room, immaculate as ever. His tie knotted with precision. He didn't sit, didn't greet her, just walked to the coffee machine and said, without turning, "Cancel your call with your father today." Clara froze. Why? Because, he said, pouring black coffee into a bone-white cup. He called my office this morning, asked questions. About us. About your well-being. He said the word like it was a flaw. I told him you're perfectly fine, that you don't need his interference. Her pulse leapt into her throat. He's my father, Adrian. He's worried. He's overstepping? Adrian countered, finally facing her. His eyes were calm, controlled, but behind them, something darker simmered. Every time he calls, you come back quieter, more distracted. I can't have that, not now. Not when the baby's coming and everything has to be stable. Stable, her voice cracked. Or controlled, he set the cup down with a quiet click. There's no difference, Clara. Not when it comes to protecting what's mine. The word mine hung in the air like smoke. She looked down at her hands, her wedding band glinting dully in the muted light. Once it had felt like a promise. Now it felt like a brand. I just want to talk to him, she whispered, to hear his voice. And I just want you to trust me, he said, softer now, stepping closer. He placed a hand on her shoulder, gentle, almost tender. Let me be enough. Let us be enough. She wanted to believe him. God, she did. But the weight of his hand felt less like comfort and more like an anchor. Later that afternoon, while Adrian was on a video call in his study, Clara tiptoed to the guest room, the one with the old landline her father had insisted they keep in case of emergencies. Her fingers trembled as she dialed his number. It rang once, twice. On the third ring, a familiar, gravelly voice answered. Clara, tears sprang to her eyes at the sound of his voice. So full of love, so full of knowing. Dad, she breathed, pressing the receiver close like a secret. I needed to hear you. Are you okay, sweetheart? His voice dropped instantly, sharpened with concern. Has something happened? She glanced toward the hallway, heart hammering. I don't know. Everything's fine, but it doesn't feel fine. Before she could say more, the study door down the hall clicked open. She froze. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. Clara, Adrian's voice called from the hallway, calm but probing. Who are you talking to? Panic seized her. I have to go, she whispered into the phone. Clara, wait. She hung up. When Adrian appeared in the doorway, his expression was unreadable. He looked at the old phone in her hand, then at her tear-streaked face. You called him, he said. Not a question. A verdict. I just wanted. You promised. He cut in, voice low, dangerously even. You promised to let me handle things, to trust me. I do trust you, she cried, the words spilling out in a rush. But I'm scared, Adrian. I feel like I'm disappearing. And I just needed to know I still exist to someone. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, slowly, he took the phone from her hand and placed it back on the cradle. I'm not trying to erase you, he said, his voice almost gentle. I'm trying to shield you. The world outside this house is cruel. People will use your vulnerability against you. Your father included. My father would never. He already has. Adrian interrupted, stepping closer. He's planted doubt in your mind. Made you question me. That's not love, Clara. That's manipulation. She stared at him, realization dawning like cold dawn. He truly believed it. He wasn't lying to her, he was lying to himself, and that was far more terrifying. That evening, over a silent dinner, Adrian announced a new rule with the ease of someone adjusting a thermostat. I've asked your prenatal therapist to send summaries directly to me from now on, just to keep things streamlined. Clara's fork clinked against her plate. You're reading my therapy notes, for your safety, he said, slicing his salmon with surgical precision. Transparency builds trust. She wanted to scream, to throw the plate, to run, but she just nodded, her hands folded in her lap, where the baby stirred, as if sensing her distress. Later, alone in the bathroom, she stared at her reflection. Dark circles under her eyes, lips pressed thin, hair dull. She barely recognized herself. She opened the medicine cabinet, not for pills, but for the small notepad she'd hidden behind the bandages. On the first page, in her neatest script, she wrote, if I vanish, remember I was here. I fought, and I loved you before I even knew your name. She tucked it back, heart pounding, because now she understood Adrian didn't want her to suffer. He wanted her to disappear quietly, to become a perfect, silent wife, a flawless vessel for his legacy. And the most chilling part, he thought he was being kind. Outside, the storm had passed. The sky cleared, cold and indifferent. But inside, Clara felt something new rising. Not just fear, but resolve. She wouldn't vanish. Not while her child still kicked with defiance. She still smiled at Adrian. Still poured his coffee. Still nodded when he said, "You look tired. Maybe skip your walk today." But inside, a quiet war raged. One afternoon, as rain tapped gently against the conservatory windows, she sat on the wicker chaise, hands resting on her belly, humming an old lullaby her mother used to sing. The baby kicked in response, strong, rhythmic, alive. "You're my courage," she whispered, tears gathering but not falling. "You always remind me I'm still here." A shadow crossed the doorway. Adrian stood there, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "Talking to yourself again," she didn't flinch. "To him," she said softly, not correcting the pronoun. Not yet ready to tell him the ultrasound had hinted at a girl. Her girl. A daughter she already vowed to protect from invisible chains. Adrian stepped inside, his shoes clicking against the tile. "You're getting too sentimental. It's not healthy. Babies don't understand words. They understand tone," she said, meeting his gaze. "They understand love and fear." A flicker crossed his face. Something like irritation, or maybe fear of his own. He sat across from her, leaning forward, elbows on knees. "Clara, I need you to be honest with me. Are you unhappy?" The question hung between them, heavy as stone. She wanted to scream yes. "I'm drowning in plain sight," but she thought of the notepad hidden in the cabinet, of her father's voice on the phone, of the tiny life growing inside her who deserved safety, even if it meant silence a little longer. So she chose her words like stepping stones over a chasm. "I'm scared," she admitted, voice trembling but clear. "Not of the baby, but of losing myself before I even get to meet her." Adrian's eyes widened slightly. Her, she nodded, holding his gaze. "They think it's a girl." For a heartbeat, something softened in him, a crack in the armor. He reached out, hesitated, then gently placed his hand on her stomach. "A daughter," he murmured, almost reverently. And for a moment, Clara dared to hope. Maybe this would change him. Maybe fatherhood would awaken the man she once believed in. But then his hand tightened, just slightly, and his voice dropped low and firm. "Then we have to be even more careful. The world is harsher on girls. They'll try to twist her mind, just like they've twisted yours." Her breath caught. "No one's twisted my mind, Adrian. I just have thoughts, feelings, questions." "Questions lead to doubt," he said, withdrawing his hand. "And doubt leads to mistakes. We can't afford mistakes. Not with her." He stood, straightening his cuffs. "I've arranged for a new nutritionist. She'll come tomorrow, and I'd prefer you stop watching the news. It's too emotional for someone in your condition." Clara watched him walk away, her chest aching with a loneliness so deep it felt like gravity. That night, she lay awake long after Adrian fell into a steady sleep beside her. Moonlight spilled across the bed, illuminating the dust in the air like floating memories. She pressed her palm to her belly and whispered, "I won't let him shape you before you've even drawn your first breath. You'll know your voice, even if mine breaks saying it." The next morning, the new nutritionist arrived, elegant, poised, and cold as marble. She scanned Clara's pantry, made notes, and said without looking up, "Mr. Lockwood has very specific expectations for your health plan. Compliance is essential." Clara nodded politely, but as the woman turned to leave, she noticed something on the counter. A small, forgotten notebook. Not hers. It had Adrian's handwriting. Her heart hammered. When the house was quiet again, she opened it. Page after page detailed not just her meals, but her moods. 7:15 p.m. Clara seemed distant during dinner, possibly talking to her father again. 10:30 a.m. Tearful after yoga. Emotional volatility increasing. Recommend reducing outside contact. Expressed desire to visit Cornwall. Denied. Risk of nostalgia-induced instability. The last entry made her blood run cold. Must accelerate transition to full home care after birth. No. External influences. She'll thank me later. She snapped the book shut, hands shaking. This wasn't concern. This was surveillance. This was erasure. And yet, she didn't cry, because in that moment, something inside her hardened into quiet steel. She wasn't helpless. She wasn't blind anymore. And she was no longer alone. Her daughter kicked once, twice, as if in agreement. Outside, the sun rose over London, indifferent to the silent revolution unfolding inside one woman's heart. But Clara knew the storm wasn't coming. It was already here. "Everly's foundation is bloated with sentiment," he'd said, voice clipped. "All heart, no discipline. That's why his influence is waning." Clara had been folding laundry outside the door, her fingers freezing over a tiny onesie. Now, the distance wasn't just professional, it was personal and intentional. It started with small things. Adrian forgot to forward birthday messages from her father. He canceled weekend visits to the countryside estate, citing security concerns or last-minute audits. When Clara asked why he never invited Charles to dinner, Adrian would sigh, as if burdened by her innocence. "Your father doesn't approve of me, Clara. He thinks I'm not good enough for you. And every time he's around, you start doubting us. I can't compete with a ghost who's convinced he owns your loyalty." "But he doesn't." "He does," Adrian interrupted gently, placing a hand over hers at the dinner table. "And I won't live in his shadow. Not in my own home. Not in my marriage." The words were wrapped in hurt, not anger, which made them harder to fight. Then came the night of the autumn gala, the one hosted by the Lockwood Group. Clara had insisted her father be invited. "It's our first public event as a family," she'd said, resting a hand on her belly. "He deserves to be there," Adrian had agreed grudgingly. But on the evening of the event, as Clara stood in the grand ballroom in a deep emerald gown that made her glow, scanning the crowd for her father's familiar silver hair, Adrian leaned close, his breath warm against her ear. "He didn't come," he murmured. "Said he wasn't feeling well." Clara's heart sank. "Did you speak to him?" "I left 3 messages," Adrian said, his tone laced with quiet disappointment. No reply. But later that night, while Adrian accepted congratulations near the champagne fountain, Clara's phone buzzed in her clutch. A text from her father tried to come. "Security at the door said I wasn't on the guest list. Called your husband's office. They said you'd both agreed I shouldn't attend. Is that true, sweetheart?" Her stomach dropped. She looked across the room. Adrian met her gaze, smiled, and raised his glass to her. His expression one of loving pride. But his eyes were watching, waiting. She typed back quickly, hands trembling. "No, Dad, I never agreed to that. I'll call you tomorrow. I love you. She hit send, just as Adrian appeared beside her, his hand resting lightly on the small of her back. Everything all right, he asked, voice smooth as silk. Just a spam message, she said, locking her phone and slipping it back into her clutch. He studied her for a heartbeat too long. Then, with a slow nod, he kissed her temple. You look tired. Let's go home soon. That night, in the back of the Bentley, rain streaking the windows like tears, Clara stared at her reflection in the glass. Pale, composed, trapped. Adrian held her hand, thumb brushing her knuckles. You know I only keep him away because I love you, right? I can't risk him filling your head with doubts. Not now. You're carrying our future. She didn't answer, but inside, a cold certainty settled over her. He wasn't keeping her father away to protect her. He was keeping him away to own her. And the most terrifying part, he truly believed he was the hero of this story. Back at the house, as Adrian helped her out of her coat, he paused, his voice dropping to a whisper. You didn't reply to your father, did you? Her breath caught. I told you, it was spam. He searched her eyes, his expression unreadable. Then softly, good girl. He kissed her forehead and walked upstairs. Clara stood in the foyer, alone, the weight of his words pressing down like stone. But then another kick, strong, insistent, as if her daughter was saying don't believe him. She walked slowly to the study, where the landline sat like a relic of another life. She picked up the receiver, her fingers steady now. She didn't dial, not yet, but she pressed the button for redial just to see. The system beeped. Last outgoing call, Charles Everly. Blocked. Adrian hadn't just removed her father from the guest list. He'd cut the line. And in that moment, Clara understood this wasn't about love. It was about dominion. And the only way out was through truth. She placed the phone back on the cradle, her heart pounding not with fear, but with resolve. Because if Adrian thought he could erase her father from her life, Reith labored. Every word filtered through fear. But inside, something was changing. She no longer flinched at his tone. She no longer apologized for existing too loudly. And though she spoke little, her mind raced, cataloging, watching, waiting. Then came the morning her body betrayed her fear. She'd been folding baby clothes, tiny socks, soft cotton gowns, a pale blue blanket her father had sent with a note that simply read, for her first sky, when a wave of dizziness crashed over her. The room tilted. Her knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the dresser, heart pounding, palms slick with sweat. For a moment she couldn't breathe, and then a sharp pain low in her abdomen. Panic seized her, not for herself, for the life inside her. She stumbled toward the bedroom, calling out, Adrian! He appeared in seconds, already dressed, briefcase in hand. What is it? I don't feel right, she gasped, clutching her belly. Something's wrong. He crossed the room in 3 strides, his face shifting from irritation to controlled alarm. He placed a hand on her forehead, then her wrist, checking her pulse like she was a machine, not a person. You're overheated, he said finally. You've been overexerting yourself again. Didn't I tell you to let the staff handle the nursery? This isn't about the nursery, she whispered, tears pricking her eyes. I need to see Dr. Langley. Now. Adrian exhaled sharply, glancing at his watch. Clara, I have the Singapore call in 20 minutes. Can't this wait until your scheduled appointment tomorrow? No, she said, voice breaking. I can't. She can't wait. He studied her, really studied her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker in his eyes, not concern for her, but fear of consequence, of scandal, of failure. Fine, he said, grabbing his phone. I'll have the car ready. But you're not calling your father. Not over a little dizziness. That's exactly the kind of thing that makes him spiral. I wasn't going to, she lied, her pulse roaring in her ears. In the car, she sat rigid, one hand pressed to her side, the other gripping the seat. The driver sped toward the private clinic. Adrian sat beside her, texting furiously, only glancing up once to say, "Breathe, you're causing yourself more stress by panicking." At the clinic, nurses ushered her into an exam room with hushed efficiency. Dr. Langley, cool, precise, Adrian's chosen, listened, examined, ran a quick ultrasound. "Everything's stable," she said, her tone clinical. "Mild dehydration and fatigue, common in the third trimester. Rest, hydrate, and try to reduce emotional strain." Clara closed her eyes, relief flooding her, until she heard Adrian say, "See, nothing to worry about. You just need to trust your body." And me, back in the car, exhaustion draped over her like a wet blanket. But beneath it, a quiet fire burned. Because during the exam, when Adrian had stepped out to take a call, the nurse had leaned in and whispered, "If you ever need to speak to someone outside the circle, your father's foundation funds our crisis liaison. Just say the word." Clara had only nodded, but the seed was planted. Now, as the car glided through afternoon traffic, she watched the city blur past the window. People walking freely, laughing, calling loved ones without permission. Her phone sat in her lap, untouched. Adrian had taken it earlier to silence notifications. He'd return it later, he said, after you've calmed down. But as they stopped at a red light, she noticed something. The car's glove compartment was slightly ajar, and inside, Adrian's spare phone. Her breath hitched. He never used it, called it his burner, said it was for sensitive deals. The light turned green. The car moved, but in that sliver of time, a plan formed. Not reckless, not loud, but desperate. Back home, Adrian helped her inside, then disappeared into his study for a critical merger call. Clara waited, listened. When the deep murmur of his voice filled the hallway, she slipped into the garage. Her hands shook as she opened the glove compartment and grabbed the spare phone. It was password locked, but she knew his patterns. She tried his birthday. No. His father's death date. No. Then, on instinct, she typed her own name. Clara. The screen unlocked. Tears blurred her vision as she scrolled. No personal messages, just business. But then she found it. The settings. Call forwarding disabled. Blocked contacts 1. She tapped it. Charles Everly. Her father's number. Blocked on both phones. A sob rose in her throat, but she choked it back. Quickly, she opened the dialer. Pressed her father's number from memory. She hadn't forgotten a single digit. It rang once, twice. Her heart hammered against her ribs. On the third ring, Clara, his voice, rough with sleep or worry, cracked through the speaker like sunlight through storm clouds. "Dad?" she whispered, tears spilling freely now. "I don't have much time. I'm not safe. The baby, she's okay, but I'm not. Where are you? I'm coming." "No," she hissed, glancing toward the house. "Not yet. He'll know. But if anything happens, please remember I tried. I fought." "Listen to me," Charles said, voice suddenly steel. "You are not alone. I've been watching, waiting. I know more than you think." Before she could ask what he meant, footsteps echoed on the patio. "Adrian, I have to go," she whispered. "Clara." She ended the call, wiped her face, and slipped the phone back just as the garage door began to rise. Adrian stood there, silhouetted against the evening light. "Feeling better?" he asked, eyes scanning her face. "Yes," she said, voice steady. "Much." He studied her a moment longer, then nodded, satisfied. But as he turned to go inside, Clara pressed a hand to her belly and whispered the only truth that kept her standing. "He doesn't know we called him." And in that breath, hope flickered. Not as a roar, but as a whisper. That had grown too loud between them. But hearing her say, "I'm not safe," those 3 words carved a canyon through his soul. He didn't call the police. Not yet. Adrian Lockwood was too powerful, too connected. One false move and Clara could be cut off completely, or worse, painted as unstable, unfit. No, this required precision, silence, strategy. By dawn, Charles had activated a network he hadn't touched in years. Discreet, loyal, trained in observation, not confrontation. a former head of security from his foundation, now retired but sharp as ever, arrived by 7 a.m. with a leather satchel and tired eyes. "You're sure about this, sir?" the man asked, setting down a tablet displaying satellite feeds of the Lockwood estate. "I've never been more sure of anything," Charles said, his voice low but unwavering. "My daughter is disappearing inside her own life, and I won't bury another woman I love without a fight." Over the next week, Charles watched, not with intrusion, but with the quiet vigilance of a hawk. He saw the comings and goings, the same nutritionist, the same therapist, the staff who never made eye contact with Clara. He noted the absence of visitors, the lack of her car leaving the driveway, the way Adrian's security detail patrolled the perimeter like sentinels. Then came the hospital records request, routine prenatal follow-up. Charles pulled a favor with a private health liaison. What he found chilled him. Clara's primary OBGYN had been replaced without her documented consent. All communications routed through Adrian's office. Even her vitamin regimen had been altered, iron levels lowered, magnesium restricted. Nothing overtly dangerous, but enough to induce fatigue, dizziness, emotional fragility. "He's not hurting her body," Charles murmured to himself one evening, staring at the data on his screen. "He's softening her mind, making her believe she's weak, that she needs him to survive." The realization hit like a fist to the chest. He picked up the phone, dialed a number he hadn't used in a decade. "Eleanor, it's Charles. I need to activate the Everly protocol." A pause. Then, a voice sharp with memory. "You swore you'd never use it." "I swore I'd protect her," he said. "And I've waited too long." The Everly protocol wasn't legal. Not exactly. It was a contingency he designed after his wife's death. A shadow system to safeguard Clara if the world ever tried to take her from him. Untraceable accounts, safe houses, medical allies outside official channels. And one unbreakable rule: no action until she asks for help. But she'd whispered it into a stolen phone. "I'm not safe." That was enough. 2 days later, Charles received a coded message from his liaison. Clara had a scheduled checkup at the private clinic. Routine. Supervised. But this time, the nurse assigned to her, newly transferred, was one of his own. At 2:17 p.m., as Clara sat on the exam table, hands folded in her lap, the nurse entered with a gentle smile and a clipboard. "Dr. Langley's running late," she said softly, closing the door. "But before we begin, your father asked me to give you this." She slipped a folded note into Clara's palm. Clara's breath caught. She opened it with trembling fingers. "I see you, I hear you, and I'm coming. Hold on just a little longer." Dad, tears sprang to her eyes, but she didn't cry. Not here. Not where Adrian's cameras might catch. Instead, she pressed the note to her chest, right over her heart, and whispered, "Thank you." The nurse nodded, her eyes glistening. "He's been watching, waiting for you to reach out. And now that you have, he won't stop until you're both free." Clara looked down at her belly, where her daughter stirred, as if sensing the shift in the air. That evening, back at the estate, Adrian greeted her with his usual calm scrutiny. "Everything all right at the clinic?" "Fine," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "Just tired." He studied her, then smiled, the same smile he'd worn the night he promised to be honest. "Good. Rest well. Big day tomorrow. The final nursery inspection." She nodded, walking past him toward the stairs. But as she reached the landing, she paused, one hand on the banister, and said without turning, "Adrian, yes. Do you ever worry that I'll wake up one day and realize I've been asleep this whole time?" He chuckled softly. "You're not asleep, Clara. You're finally at peace." She didn't answer, because she knew peace wasn't silence. Peace wasn't fear dressed as care. Peace was the sound of her father's voice, reaching through the dark. And somewhere beyond the gates, beyond the surveillance, beyond the lies, Charles Everly was moving. Not with rage, not with noise, but with the terrible, quiet certainty of a storm that had already passed the point of no return. Clara climbed the rest of the stairs, her steps lighter than they'd been in months. Because for the first time since she'd said, "I do," she wasn't waiting to be saved. Clara sat across from him in a high-backed chair, her hands folded in her lap, her belly full but her stomach knotted. She wore the navy dress he liked, the one with the high collar that hid the pulse in her throat. He poured her mineral water, not wine, and offered a small, approving smile. "You look calm tonight. I like that." She didn't answer right away. Instead, she watched the flame on the nearest candle tremble in the draft from the open terrace doors. Outside, the garden lay still, bathed in moonlight, beautiful, silent, and watched. "I dreamed about Mom last night," she said finally, her voice soft but steady. Adrian's fork paused mid-air. "Oh," she was planting roses, Clara continued, her gaze distant. She kept saying, "Some roots need room to breathe, or they rot from the inside." She looked at him then, eyes clear, unflinching. Do you think she meant people to a beat of silence? The clock on. The mantle ticked like a countdown. Adrian set his fork down with deliberate calm. "Your mother was a poet, Clara, not a strategist. The world doesn't reward openness. It rewards control." "Is that what this is?" she asked, gesturing faintly to the room, the house, the life they'd built. "Control," he leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice dropping to that velvet tone that once made her feel chosen, but now made her feel caged. "It's protection. You keep acting like I'm your jailer, when all I've done is shield you from chaos, from people who'd use your kindness against you, from your own tendency to trust too easily." "My kindness," she almost laughed, but it caught in her throat like glass. "You make it sound like a weakness." "It is," he said simply. "In this world, kindness without boundaries is surrender. And I won't let you surrender, especially not now." He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. His touch was warm, familiar, but Clara didn't pull away. She let him hold her hand, even as her skin crawled. "You're carrying our daughter," he murmured. "She needs a mother who's strong, not scattered. A mother who understands that love isn't just feeling. It's discipline." "I am disciplined," she said quietly. "I've stayed. I've smiled. I've swallowed every doubt so you wouldn't feel threatened. But that doesn't mean I've stopped thinking." His thumb stilled on her knuckles. "Are you saying you don't trust me?" "I'm saying I miss myself," she whispered. "And I don't know how to find her again while living inside your version of what I should be." For the first time, something flickered in Adrian's eyes. Not anger, not even fear. Hurt. "You think I don't see you," he said, voice cracking just slightly. "You think I don't know how brilliant you are, how fierce, but the world won't celebrate that, Clara. It'll punish you for it. And I can't. I won't let that happen. So you'll erase me instead?" she asked, tears finally spilling over, but her voice didn't break. "Piece by piece, until I'm just the quiet wife who nods and smiles and never asks for anything." He pulled his hand back as if burned. "That's not what I'm doing. Isn't it?" She wiped her cheek with the back of her wrist, her gaze locking onto his. "You blocked my father's calls. You changed my doctor. You decide what I eat, who I see, what I wear. You even take my phone when I'm emotional. That's not love, Adrian. That's ownership." The word hung between them like a blade. Adrian stood abruptly, his chair scraping against marble. "You're tired. Hormones. Fear. I get it. But don't confuse my care for control." He turned toward the terrace, his silhouette sharp against the moonlight. "You have everything you ever said you wanted. A home, a child, security. And yet you act like I'm the villain." "I don't want a gilded cage," she said, rising slowly, one hand on her belly. "I want a partner, someone who lets me be afraid and strong, who lets me love my father and you, who doesn't treat my heart like a project to be managed." He didn't turn around, but his shoulders tightened. "And if I can't be that," he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Then you don't get to keep me," she said. Silence. Then, from the hallway, a soft chime, the doorbell. Both of them froze. Adrian frowned. "Who on earth?" He walked to the entryway, Clara trailing behind, her heart pounding for reasons she couldn't name. Through the frosted glass of the front door, a figure stood, tall, silver-haired, impeccably dressed in a charcoal overcoat despite the mild night. Charles Everly. Adrian's breath hitched. What is he doing here? Clara's hands flew to her mouth. Dad! Before Adrian could react, she rushed forward and threw open the door. The cool night air rushed in. And there he stood, her father, eyes red-rimmed but steady, holding a single white rose, the same kind her mother used to grow. I couldn't wait any longer, he said, voice thick with emotion. I heard you, sweetheart, and I'm here. Behind her, Adrian's voice cut through the moment like ice. This is private property, Charles. You weren't invited. Charles didn't look at him. His eyes were only on Clara. I don't need an invitation to see my daughter. Adrian stepped between them, voice low, dangerous. You're upsetting her, and she's 9 months pregnant. Is that what you want? Clara moved around him, placing herself squarely in front of her father. No, she said, looking Adrian in the eye. But I'd rather be upset by truth than comforted by lies. And in that moment, standing in the doorway between two worlds, the life she'd been forced into, and the love that had never stopped searching for her, Clara finally breathed, not just for herself, but for the daughter kicking fiercely inside her, for the woman she was reclaiming, his skin. You should leave, Adrian said, his voice low, controlled, but trembling at the edges. This isn't the time. Charles finally looked at him, his gaze weathered but unbroken. The time passed weeks ago. You just didn't notice. Clara stepped forward, her voice quiet but firm. He's not leaving, Adrian. Not this time. Adrian turned to her, eyes wide with something that looked like betrayal. You called him. I didn't have to, she said. He's been watching, waiting, because unlike you, he listens. A sharp breath escaped him. He glanced between them, the illusion of control cracking like thin ice. You think he's your savior? He's using you to undermine me, to prove he was right about me all along. No, Charles said, stepping forward at last. I'm here because my daughter whispered she wasn't safe, and that's all I need to know. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small, worn envelope, yellowed at the edges, sealed with a wax stamp shaped like a crescent moon. Clara recognized it instantly. Her mother's handwriting. Your mother wrote this the week before she passed, Charles said, pressing it into Clara's hands. She asked me to give it to you. The moment you stopped believing in your own voice. Clara's breath caught. She hadn't seen this letter in years, had thought it lost. Trembling, she broke the seal. Inside, in her mother's looping script, my dearest Clara, if you're reading this, it means you've forgotten your own strength. So let me remind you, you were born with a spine of steel and a heart too vast for small minds to understand. Never let anyone, no man, no title, no promise, convince you that love requires silence. True love makes space for your truth. And if you find yourself in a room where your voice is the only thing missing, walk out. Your worth was never theirs to keep. Always, Mama. Tears streamed down Clara's face, but she didn't wipe them away. The words didn't just speak to her. They freed her. Adrian watched her read, his expression shifting from anger to something far more unsettling, fear. Not of Charles, but of her. Of the woman standing before him who was no longer afraid. You kept this from me? Clara whispered, looking up at her father. All this time, I waited, he said gently, until you needed it most. Not when you were angry, but when you were ready to remember who you are. Adrian took a step back. Clara, don't do this. Don't let him turn you against everything we've built. We didn't build anything, she said, her voice clear as morning light. You built a monument to your fear, and I was just the ornament on top. He flinched as if struck. Then, in a voice so soft it barely carried over the rustling leaves, he said, What do you want from me? The truth, she said. Start with that. He looked at her belly, at the daughter he'd already begun to claim as his legacy. I never meant to hurt you, he said, and for the first time, it sounded like he meant it. I was just terrified that you'd leave, that I'd lose you like I lost everything else." Clara studied him. The man who had once made her feel seen, now revealed as a boy afraid of being small. "You didn't lose me, Adrian. You tried to disappear me, and that's not the same." Charles placed a hand on her shoulder. "We're going home, sweetheart." Adrian's eyes snapped to him. "She's not going anywhere. She's 9 months pregnant. Where would she go? To a house where the doors are open," Charles said calmly. "Where her voice isn't monitored. Where her child will be raised to speak freely, not obey quietly." Adrian turned to Clara, desperation bleeding through his composure. "You can't leave. Not now. What about the birth plan, the security, I'll give birth wherever I feel safe," she interrupted. "And right now, that's not here." A long silence stretched. Somewhere in the garden, an owl called, a low, mournful sound. Then Adrian did something no one expected. He sank into the nearest chair, his shoulders slumping, his face buried in his hands. "I don't know how to be what you need," he whispered. "I only know how to hold on." Clara looked at him, not with pity, not with hatred, but with sorrow for the man he might have been, had he ever believed he was enough. She stepped toward him, slowly, and placed a hand on his arm. "You don't have to hold on to keep someone. Sometimes love means letting go." He didn't look up, but his fingers twitched, as if wanting to grasp hers, and then letting go. Charles didn't speak. He simply waited, giving Clara the space to choose. And in that moment, beneath a sky thick with stars, Clara made her decision. Not out of anger, but out of love. Love for her daughter, for her mother's memory, for the woman she had almost lost. She turned to her father and nodded. He wrapped a gentle arm around her, shielding her not from danger, but from the weight of what she'd endured. As they walked toward the waiting car, Clara glanced back once. Adrian sat alone in the doorway, bathed in shadow, the white rose her father had brought lying forgotten on the marble floor. She didn't say goodbye, because some goodbyes aren't spoken. From the confrontation, her father drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting lightly on the seat beside her. A quiet offer of presence, not pressure. For miles, neither spoke. The city lights blurred into streaks of gold and red, reflections dancing across Clara's tear-streaked cheeks. Inside her, her daughter kicked. Once, twice, strong and insistent, as if to say, "We're still here. We're still ours." Finally, Charles broke the silence. "We're going to the old house, the one in Sussex. No staff, no cameras, just you, me, and the sea." Clara nodded, her voice hoarse. "He'll come after us." "He won't," Charles said, his tone calm but certain. "Not yet, because if he does, he admits he had something to lose. And Adrian Lockwood doesn't lose. He calculates." She closed her eyes, exhaustion pressing down like lead. "I thought I could fix it, that if I just loved him enough, he'd see me, not his idea of me." "Love doesn't fix broken control," Charles said gently. "It only feeds it if you let it." A sob rose in her throat, but she swallowed it. "What if I made a mistake? What if leaving makes things worse for her?" She placed a hand on her belly, her fingers trembling. Charles glanced at her, his eyes soft with decades. A quiet pain. "Your mother asked me the same thing the night she left my father's world. She stayed too long, thinking endurance was strength. Don't make her mistake, Clara. Safety isn't just walls and security codes. It's peace in your bones. And you haven't had that in months." They drove on, the motorway stretching into darkness. 2 days later, in the sun-drenched sitting room of the Sussex cottage, walls lined with books, windows open to the sound of crashing waves, Clara sat wrapped in a wool blanket, sipping chamomile tea. Her father had arranged everything: a trusted midwife, a discreet OBGYN from his foundation, groceries stocked with her favorites. Even the lavender soap she loved sat by the sink. But peace was fragile. On the third morning, as she stood on the back porch watching seagulls circle over the cliffs, her phone buzzed. Not her personal line. This was the secure burner Charles had given her. A message from an unknown number: "You left without saying goodbye." Was I really that unbearable? Her breath caught. Adrian. She stared at the screen, heart hammering. Before she could respond, another message followed. I've been thinking. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I held on too tight. Can we talk not as husband and wife? Just as people who loved each other once. Tears blurred her vision. The words were tender, vulnerable, almost enough to make her turn back. But then she remembered the blocked calls, the altered vitamins, the way he'd stood between her and her father like a gatekeeper of her own heart. She typed slowly, fingers steady, love doesn't lock doors, Adrian. It leaves them open. She hit send and powered off the phone. That evening, as twilight painted the sky in lavender and rose, Charles found her on the porch swing, hands resting on her belly, eyes distant. He reached out, she said without turning. He sat beside her, the old wood creaking softly. And I told him the truth. Charles nodded. Good. Silence settled between them, comfortable now, rooted in trust, not performance. Then Clara whispered, what if he changes? What if he really tries? Her father looked out at the sea, his voice quiet but firm. People can change, Clara, but they only do it when they want to, not when they're losing something they own. Adrian doesn't miss you. He misses control. And until he sees that, he'll only ever love the version of you that obeyed him. She leaned her head on his shoulder, the way she had as a child. I'm scared, Dad. I know, he said, wrapping an arm around her. But you're not alone anymore. And she's not either. As if on cue, her daughter kicked hard. Clara laughed through fresh tears. She agrees. Charles smiled, but his eyes were watchful. Because he knew Adrian wouldn't vanish quietly. Men like him didn't surrender. They recalibrated. And somewhere in London, in a penthouse stripped of warmth, a man sat alone in the dark, rereading her message over and over, his pride bleeding into something far more dangerous: obsession. But here, on this cliff by the sea, Clara breathed. Not perfectly, not without fear, but freely. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. She'd been folding tiny onesies by the fireplace, humming to herself, when a wave of dizziness hit her like a silent tide. The room tilted, her vision blurred at the edges. She gripped the edge of the armchair, breath shallow, heart racing. Dad, she called out, voice thin. Charles appeared in the doorway instantly, his eyes sharp with the vigilance of a man who'd spent weeks waiting for this exact moment. Clara, what's wrong? I don't know, she whispered, trembling, my head spinning, and my chest. Before she could finish, her knees gave out. Charles caught her just before she hit the floor, lowering her gently onto the rug. Breathe, sweetheart, just breathe. But she couldn't. Her hands clutched her belly, her breath coming in short, panicked gasps. Something's wrong. The baby? I'm calling Dr. Reyes, he said, already pulling out his phone. 10 minutes later, the midwife arrived, calm, efficient, with kind eyes that held no judgment, only care. After a quick exam, she spoke softly. Your blood pressure's elevated. You're exhausted, dehydrated, and emotionally strained. It's not an emergency, but it's your body's way of saying, enough. Charles stood by the window, arms crossed, jaw tight. We need to get her to a proper facility, just to be safe. Clara shook her head weakly. No hospitals. Not with him out there. Dr. Reyes knelt beside her. There's a private clinic an hour south. Discreet. No links to Lockwood Group. Your father's foundation helped fund it. They'll take you in under a different name. Clara looked at her father. Will he find out? If we're careful, no, Charles said. But you need monitoring. For both your sakes. She nodded, tears slipping down her temples. Okay. At the clinic, tucked away in a quiet coastal town, the staff treated her with gentle efficiency. No questions, no cameras, just soft voices and warm blankets. They ran tests, checked the baby's heartbeat, strong, steady, and gave Clara fluids through and for. Alone in the small, sunlit room, she lay with her eyes closed, listening to the steady beep of the monitor, the distant cry of gulls. Then, a nurse entered with a cup of ginger tea and a quiet smile. "Your father's speaking with the doctor. He asked me to give you this." She handed Clara a sleek, unmarked phone. "It's clean, encrypted. One number only." Clara's breath hitched. "My father's—" "No," the nurse said gently. "Yours." Confused, Clara took. The screen lit up, a simple interface, one contact saved under a single name, Dad. But then she remembered her real phone, the one Adrian had controlled, was still back at the estate. This one. This was hers. Truly hers. Her fingers trembled as she unlocked it. No filters. No oversight. Just silence and possibility. Without thinking, she opened the messages and typed, "If you're reading this, I'm okay. But I need you to know. I'm not going back. And I won't let anyone silence me again. Not even for love." She hit send, to her father's real number, the one she'd memorized as a child. Then, on impulse, she opened a new message. Not to Adrian. Not yet. She typed her mother's old email, long inactive, but still held in memory like a prayer. "I found your letter, and I'm trying." She didn't expect a reply, but sending it felt like lighting a candle in a long dark room. Later, as twilight fell, Charles returned. His face lined with worry that softened when he saw her sitting up, sipping tea, the new phone resting in her lap like a promise. "You look better," he said, sitting beside her. "I feel like myself again," she whispered. "Even if it's just for an hour." He took her hand. "It's not just an hour, Clara. It's forever if you choose it." She looked down at her belly. She kicked 3 times while I was getting the 4, like she was saying, "Keep going." Charles smiled faintly. "She's got your spine." A pause. Then Clara said, "He's going to come looking." "Let him," Charles said, voice quiet but steel-edged. "But this time he won't find a victim. He'll find a woman who's reclaimed her voice, and a grandfather who'll move heaven and earth to protect her." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. But inside, Clara held her phone tightly and finally understood safety wasn't a place. It was a choice, and she'd just made hers. She looked at her father, tears in her eyes but strength in her voice. "I want to give birth here, in this clinic, with you in the room." He squeezed her hand. "Then that's where we'll be." As night deepened, Clara lay back, the monitor beeping softly beside her. The sound of 2 hearts beating, free and unbroken. And for the first time in months, she didn't dream of locked doors. "Clara, if labor starts early, we'll be ready. But you need rest. Real rest." Clara nodded, though sleep still felt like a country she couldn't enter. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Adrian's face. Not angry, not cruel, but wounded. And that haunted her more than rage ever could. A soft knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. "Come in," she said, voice barely above a whisper. The door opened slowly, and there he stood, her father, yes. But behind him, filling the doorway with an unexpected presence, was a man she hadn't seen in weeks. Charles stepped inside first, his expression unreadable. "Clara, he's here." Her breath stopped. Adrian Lockwood stood just beyond the threshold, rainwater glistening on his overcoat. His hair damp, his eyes red-rimmed. Not from tears, but from exhaustion. He didn't look like the polished titan of finance. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "May I come in?" he asked, voice raw. Clara's pulse roared in her ears. Every instinct screamed to say no, to call security, to hide. But something in his posture, the way his hands hung at his sides, empty, unclenched, made her hesitate. She glanced at her father. Charles gave a single, slow nod. "I'll be right outside." He stepped out, closing the door behind him with a quiet click. Silence stretched between them, thick, trembling. Adrian didn't move forward. "You look tired," he finally said. "So do you," she replied. He let out a breath that sounded like surrender. "I didn't know where you were. For days I thought you'd vanished. Like your mother did." The words slipped out before he could stop them, laced with a pain she'd never seen in him before. Clara's chest tightened. "My mother didn't vanish. She left to survive. He looked down, jaw working. I keep thinking, if I just listened, if I just seen you. You saw what you needed to see, she said softly. A wife who wouldn't challenge you. A legacy vessel. Not a person. He flinched. That's not true. Isn't it? She gestured to her belly. You planned her nursery before you ever asked what I wanted. You changed my doctor without telling me. You blocked my father like he was a threat, not my lifeline. Her voice broke, but she didn't stop. You called it love. But love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't monitor. Love doesn't make someone feel like they're disappearing. Adrian took a step forward, then stopped himself. I was scared, he admitted, voice cracking. Scared that if I let you breathe, you'd realize I wasn't enough. That you'd leave. And now I have, she said gently. Not because you're not enough, Adrian, but because you tried to make me less so you could feel more. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, there were tears, real, unguarded. I don't know how to fix this, he whispered. You don't fix it, she said. You start over. From honesty. From respect. Not from control. He looked at her belly, his voice barely audible. Will I get to meet her? Clara studied him. The man who had once swept her off her feet with promises of forever, now standing before her, shattered and searching. If you choose to see her as herself, she said slowly, not as your heir, not as your redemption, but as a person with her own voice, her own mind, then yes, there's a path. His breath hitched. What do I do first? She said, meeting his eyes. You let me go. Fully. Without conditions. Without surveillance. Without trying to win me back like I'm a deal to close. He swallowed hard. And if I fail, then you try again, she said. Because that's what real love does. It doesn't demand perfection. It practices patience. A long silence. Then, from outside the door, hurried footsteps. Charles reappeared, his face grim. Clara, he said urgently. We have a problem. Adrian tensed. What? Charles didn't look at him. Your security team traced the ambulance from Sussex. They're outside. 2 cars. They say they're concerned for your well-being. But they're not leaving. Adrian's expression shifted instantly. Shoulders straightening, eyes sharpening. The vulnerable man vanished, replaced by the strategist. I didn't send them, he said quickly, pulling out his phone. I swear. But Clara saw it, the flicker of calculation. The instinct to manage, to control the narrative. Then call them off, she said, voice steady. Right now. In front of me. He hesitated just a second, but it was enough. Clara's heart sank. Do it, she said. Or walk out that door and don't come back. Adrian stared at her, then at his phone. His thumb hovered over the screen. Outside, a car door slammed. He exhaled sharply and pressed the call button. Marcus, pull back. Now, that's an order. He ended the call and looked at her, raw again. I'm trying, Clara. I really am. She believed him, but belief wasn't enough. Not anymore. Before she could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. Sudden, deep. She gasped, clutching her belly. Clara. Adrian stepped forward, alarmed. Don't, she said through gritted teeth. Just don't touch me. Charles was at her side in an instant. How far apart are the contractions? I don't know, she panted. But it hurts. More than before. Adrian stood frozen in the doorway, torn between urgency and obedience. Then Dr. Reyes rushed in, calm but swift. Okay, Clara, breathe with me. We've been expecting this. As the medical team moved in, Adrian took a step back, his face pale. Charles turned to him, voice low but firm. If you truly care about her, if you care about that baby, then you'll stay out of the way. Let her choose her peace. Adrian looked at Clara, labor beginning to ripple through her body. Her eyes locked on his, not with anger, but with quiet warning. He nodded once, then turned and walked out. But as the door closed behind him, Clara knew this wasn't an ending. It was a test. And somewhere beyond the clinic walls, in the rain-soaked parking lot, a man stood watching the window, No longer a husband, not yet a father. Just a man waiting to prove he could be worthy of the life about to be born. Inside, as the first real contraction gripped her, Clara squeezed her father's hand and whispered through the pain, "Stay with me." "I'm not going anywhere," he said, and for the first time she believed it. OM had dimmed, softened, transformed into a cocoon of focus and fear and fierce, trembling hope. Outside, the rain had turned to a downpour, and then, just as another contraction crested, a sharp knock on the door. Before anyone could answer, it opened. Adrian stood there again, drenched, his coat clinging to his frame. But this time he wasn't alone. Behind him, calm as a mountain in a storm, stood a woman Clara hadn't seen in years, Eleanor Voss, her father's former CFO, now head of the Everly Family Trust. Elegant, unshakable, and holding a slim black folder. Charles's eyes widened. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" She stepped past Adrian without a word and placed the folder gently on the bedside table. "You asked me to bring it if the time came." Clara looked between them, breath shallow. "What is that?" Charles met her gaze, his voice low. "The truth." Adrian frowned. "What truth?" Eleanor turned to him, her expression unreadable. "The one you've been living on borrowed ground." Adrian stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Oh, I think you do," Charles said quietly. He opened the folder and pulled out a single sheet, clean, legal, stamped with the Everly Trust seal. Clara's eyes struggled to focus through the pain, but she saw enough. It was a loan agreement, dated 5 years ago, from the Everly Family Trust to Adrian Lockwood, for the full acquisition of his flagship company, the one he'd built from nothing. Her breath caught. You funded him." Charles didn't look away. "Not as a gift, as a test. I saw how he looked at you, like you were the prize that would finally make him legitimate. So I made a condition: if he ever disrespected you, controlled you, or made you feel less than whole, the debt would come due. In full. With interest." Adrian stared at the paper like it was on fire. "You never told me." She knew. "I didn't have to," Charles said. "I thought your conscience would be enough." But clearly it wasn't. Another contraction ripped through Clara, sharper this time. She cried out, doubling over. "Clara!" Adrian took a step forward, but Charles held up a hand. "Stay where you are," he said, voice like steel. "You don't get to play the hero now." Adrian's face twisted, not with anger, but with something worse, shame. "I didn't know." She didn't know, he whispered. I thought I'd earned it." "You earned nothing," Eleanor said coolly. "You were given a chance. And you used it to cage the very woman who gave you access to this life." Tears streamed down Clara's face. Not just from pain, but from the shattering of a dream. The empire Adrian had built, the confidence he wore like armor, it had all been propped up by her father's trust. And he'd repaid it by trying to erase her. "You let me believe I saved you," she gasped between breaths, looking at Adrian. "That you rose on your own. That your love was pure because it came from strength. I wanted to be strong for you," he said, voice breaking. "I just didn't know how to be enough without the illusion." Charles stepped closer to Clara, brushing her hair from her forehead. "You don't owe him your peace, sweetheart. Not now. Not ever." But Clara looked at Adrian, not with hatred, but with a sorrow so deep it ached. "All I ever asked for was your honesty. And you gave me a palace built on a lie." He had no answer. Then Dr. Reyes spoke firmly. "Clara, the baby's coming. Now." The room snapped into action. Nurses moved. Lights adjusted. The world narrowed to breath, push, pain, and hope. Adrian stood frozen in the corner, watching, helpless. Charles squeezed Clara's hand. "You're doing beautifully. She's almost here." Through tears and effort, Clara locked eyes with Adrian one last time. "If you ever want to know her, start by knowing the truth about yourself." He nodded, silent, his face streaked with rain, or maybe tears. Then a final push. A cry. Sharp, clear, alive. Dr. Reyes lifted a tiny, squirming body wrapped in a soft blanket. "It's a girl, and she's perfect." Clara sobbed, arms outstretched. "Let me hold her." As her daughter was placed in her arms, warm, red-faced, blinking up at the world, Clara whispered, "Welcome, my brave one. You're safe now." Charles kissed her forehead, tears in his eyes. "You did it, Clara. Both of you." Behind them, Adrian stood utterly still, watching the scene like a man seeing sunlight for the first time after years in a cave. Eleanor turned to him, voice low. "The debt is due. But Charles has offered you a choice: repay it in full and walk away clean, or enter rehabilitation for emotional accountability, supervised by our foundation, and earn the right to be in her life." Adrian didn't look at the contract. He looked only at Clara, holding her daughter, whispering words only the two of them would ever know. And for the first time, he didn't see a possession. He saw a person, whole, unbroken, free. "I'll do it," he said, voice rough with awe. "Whatever it takes." Charles didn't smile. "Good, because love isn't about owning someone's future. It's about honoring their freedom, even when it costs you everything." Outside, the rain began to ease. WN at the tiny face nestled in the crook of her arm. Rosy lips parted, lashes like brushed silk. She felt her heart crack open wider than she thought possible. Charles sat in the armchair by the window, dozing lightly, his hand resting on the folder that still lay open on the side table. The loan agreement. The reckoning. A soft knock startled them both. Dr. Reyes peeked in. "How are you holding up?" "Better than I deserve," Clara whispered, adjusting the blanket around her daughter's shoulders. The doctor smiled gently. "She's strong, just like her mother." She paused, then added, "He's still outside." Clara didn't need to ask who. "Is he waiting for permission?" "He's waiting for you to decide if he exists in your world now," Dr. Reyes said simply. "But he hasn't moved in 3 hours. Just stands by his car, staring at the window." Charles stirred, eyes weary but alert. "He's not the man you married, Clara. But he's not the monster you feared either. He's in between. And that's the hardest place to be." Clara looked down at her daughter, peaceful, unaware of the storm that had raged to bring her into the world. "What if I let him in, and he breaks her heart like he almost broke mine?" "You won't let him," Charles said quietly, "because now you know your voice, and you'll teach her to use hers." A long silence. Then, from the doorway, a voice, soft, hesitant. "I don't expect forgiveness." Adrian stood there, still damp from the night air, his suit rumpled, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion and something new, humility. Clara's breath caught. She didn't move, didn't speak. He didn't step inside, just stood in the threshold, hands clasped like a man afraid to touch anything sacred. "I read the terms," he said. "The rehabilitation program, the financial restitution, the supervised visits." He swallowed hard. "I've already signed the preliminary agreement. I'll sell the penthouse, the cars, whatever's needed." Clara studied him, the way his shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in release. The way he kept his gaze lowered, not out of shame, but out of respect. "Why?" she asked finally. "Why do it? You could walk away, rebuild somewhere else. Pretend this never happened." He looked up then, eyes glistening. "Because I finally see what I almost lost. Not a wife, not a legacy. You, the woman who saw me before I was polished, who believed I could be better, even when I proved her wrong." His voice cracked. "And her?" He nodded toward the baby. "I don't want to be the man she reads about in a custody file one day. I want to be the man who earned the right to hold her hand when she's scared." Tears spilled down Clara's cheeks, but she didn't look away. Charles rose slowly and walked to the door. He stopped beside Adrian, not touching him, but standing close enough that their shoulders almost brushed. "You don't get to decide what you've earned," Charles said, voice low but firm. "She does, and she will on her own time, not yours." Adrian nodded. "I know." Then, to Clara's surprise, he turned to leave. "Adrian," she called softly. He froze. She held her daughter a little tighter. "Her name is Elise, after my mother." He closed his eyes. When he opened them, there were tears. "Elise," he repeated. as if tasting the name like a prayer. "It's beautiful." "You can say it again," Clara said, her voice trembling but clear. "In 6 months. If you've done the work. If you've stayed honest. If you've learned that love isn't control." He looked at her, really looked, and for the first time there was no calculation in his eyes. Only sorrow. Only hope. "I'll be here," he said. Then he turned and walked down the hall, footsteps echoing like a man leaving one life behind to earn another. Charles returned to his chair, watching Clara with quiet pride. "She'll know the truth about him someday?" Clara whispered, stroking Elise's cheek. "All of it. The good and the broken. And she'll know the truth about you," he said. "That you chose yourself and her over fear." Outside, the clouds parted. Moonlight spilled across the floor like liquid silver. And in that quiet room, filled with the scent of newborn skin and lavender and salt air, Clara finally understood freedom wasn't the absence of pain. It was the courage to rebuild after it. She looked down at Elise, whose tiny fingers curled instinctively around hers. "I promise you," she whispered, "you'll never have to fight to be heard." And for the first time since she'd said, "I do," Clara Everly believed in forever, not as a cage but as a choice. Clara's finger like an anchor. Peace had settled into her bones, but it was a peace earned, not given. Fragile as sea glass, precious because it had been broken and remade. Then, one afternoon, a car appeared on the winding coastal road. Not Adrian's sleek black sedan. This one was modest, a silver hybrid, windows clean, no tint, no armor. It stopped at the gate. Charles stepped out from the garden shed, wiping his hands on a rag, his posture alert but not alarmed. Clara didn't move. She simply adjusted Elisa's blanket and waited. The door opened. Adrian stepped out, clean-shaven, dressed in simple chinos and a soft gray sweater, no watch, no cufflinks. He carried nothing but a small paper bag. He didn't approach the porch, just stood by the gate, hands in his pockets, looking up at her like a man afraid to trespass on sacred ground. Clara met his gaze. No anger, no fear, just quiet assessment. After a long moment, she nodded. He opened the gate slowly, as if it might vanish if he moved too fast. "Is she—" he began, voice hushed. "Asleep," Clara said. "But she'll wake soon." He stopped a few feet from the steps, eyes fixed on the bundle in her arms. "She's grown. Babies do that," Clara said gently. "Even when you're not there." He flinched but didn't argue. "I've been in therapy, 3 times a week, group sessions, private counseling. I've met with financial auditors, sold the penthouse, the Aston, even the watch you gave me on our first anniversary." Clara's breath caught. "Why would you sell that?" "Because it wasn't a gift," he said, looking down. "It was a performance. I bought it to prove I'd made it. Not because I thought you'd like it." He paused. "I keep thinking about what you said, that love doesn't lock doors. And I realize I didn't just lock yours. I threw away the key." The honesty in his voice wasn't polished. It was raw, rough-edged, like a man scraping rust off his own soul. Clara studied him. "Do you understand now why what you did was wrong?" "It wasn't just wrong," he said, voice breaking. "It was a betrayal of the one person who saw me before I was someone. And I tried to reshape you into a mirror so I wouldn't have to face myself." He looked up, eyes glistening. "I'm not asking for you back, Clara. I'm asking if I can exist in her life, even from a distance, even if it's just watching her laugh at a park someday." A breeze stirred the air, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine. Elise stirred in her sleep, letting out a soft sigh. Clara looked down at her daughter. So small, so full of possibility. Then she looked back at Adrian. "You don't get to decide what kind of father you'll be," she said softly. "She does. And that starts with you showing up, not as the man who owned her mother, but as a man who respects her right to choose." He nodded slowly. "I've started the supervised visit program. Next week." They said, "If I complete 12 months with clean evaluations, I can request limited contact." "Good," Clara said. "Then do it. Not for me. Not even for her yet." Do it for the boy who thought he had to control everything to be loved. He swallowed hard. Then, almost shyly, he held out the paper bag. I brought something. For her. Not expensive. Just something I saw and thought she might like. Clara took it carefully, opening the bag. Inside was a simple wooden music box, hand-painted with stars and a crescent moon. The same symbol from her mother's letter. She looked up, startled. My mother had one like it, she whispered. I know, he said. You mentioned it once. Years ago. I didn't think you'd remember me remembering. Tears welled in her eyes. Not from sadness, but from the startling weight of being seen, even in the past. She didn't invite him in, didn't offer tea, but she didn't send him away. You can sit, she said, nodding to the empty chair across from her. For 10 minutes, while she sleeps. Adrian's breath hitched. He sat slowly, as if the chair might dissolve beneath him. For a long while they said nothing, just watched the sea, listened to the gulls, felt the sun warm their skin. Then, quietly, Adrian spoke. I used to think love was something you won, like a deal, like a prize. He glanced at Elise, his voice softening. But she's not a prize. She's a person, and she deserves to grow up knowing she's enough, exactly as she is. Clara looked at him, really looked, and saw not the man who had tried to silence her, but the man who was learning painfully to listen. She will, Clara said, because I'll make sure of it. He nodded, eyes on his daughter's face. Thank you for letting me see her. She didn't say, you're welcome. She didn't say, I forgive you. But she didn't look away. And in that shared silence, under the open sky, something new began. Not a reunion, not a return, but the slow, tender unraveling of a lie they'd both believed for too long. Love wasn't control. Clara watched her daughter from the kitchen window, her tea cooling in her hands. She'd grown stronger, her body, her voice, her boundaries. And yet, the past still lingered like mist in the early morning, not gone, but no longer suffocating. That afternoon, Charles arrived with Eleanor in tow, both carrying folders and an air of solemn purpose. He completed the program, Charles said without preamble, setting a sealed envelope on the table. 12 months, no missed sessions, no defensiveness in evaluations. He even volunteered at a men's emotional accountability shelter. Clara didn't touch the envelope, and Eleanor stepped forward, her gaze steady. He's formally petitioned for supervised visits, once a week, 2 hours at a neutral center. All expenses covered by him. No contact outside those parameters unless you approve. Clara looked out at Elise, who had just pulled herself up on the coffee table, wobbling with pride. He's not the same man, Charles said softly. But that doesn't mean he's safe yet. Only that he's trying. That evening, Adrian arrived, not at the gate this time, but at the designated family center in the village, a converted library with soft lighting and toys scattered like fallen leaves. Clara stood just inside the door, Elise in her arms, her heart pounding not with fear, but with the weight of a choice. He was already there, sitting on a small blue mat, hands folded in his lap. He looked up when she entered. No smile. No flourish, just quiet presence. You came, he said. I did, she replied. She set Elise down gently on the rug nearby. The baby blinked up at Adrian, curious, unafraid. He didn't reach for her, didn't speak to her, just sat watching, giving her space to decide if he was safe. After a long moment, Elise crawled toward him, slow, deliberate, then stopped a foot away, studying him like a tiny judge. Adrian met her gaze. Hello, Elise, he said, voice softer than Clara had ever heard it. Your eyes are just like your mother's. Elise tilted her head. Then, to everyone's surprise, she held out the rabbit. Adrian's breath caught. Slowly, with trembling hands, he took it. Thank you, he whispered. Clara watched, tears gathering but not falling. This wasn't forgiveness. This wasn't reconciliation. This was something quieter, something harder. Later, as they walked back to the cottage under a twilight sky streaked with rose and indigo, Charles asked, What will you do now? Clara looked down at Elise, now asleep in her carrier, cheek pressed against soft cotton, rabbit tucked under her arm. I won't let him near her unsupervised for a long time, she said. Not until she can say no and mean it. But I won't erase him either. She paused. Because that's what he did to me, and I won't do that to her. Charles nodded. He asked to speak with you alone before he left. Clara frowned. About what? He said. He had one last thing to give you. That night, after Elise was asleep and the fire crackled low in the hearth, Adrian returned. Not to the house, but to the garden bench beneath the old oak where Clara's mother used to read poetry. She found him there, standing with his hands in his pockets, staring at the stars. You wanted to talk, she said, stopping a few feet away. He turned. I sold everything, the last of the assets, paid the debt in full plus interest. The Everly Trust released the lien this morning. He took a deep breath. But that's not why I'm here. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small velvet box. Not jewelry. Too plain. Open it, he said. She did. Inside was a single key and a deed. To the cottage in Cornwall, he said. The one your mother loved. I bought it years ago before we married as a surprise. But I never gave it to you, because I was afraid you'd go there without me. Clara's breath hitched. She remembered that cottage. Wild roses climbing the stone walls, the smell of salt and thyme, her mother's laughter echoing in every room. I never knew you bought it, she whispered. I was going to give it to you on our first anniversary, he said, voice rough. But by then, I'd already started tightening the leash. And I knew, deep down, you'd leave if you had a place to go. He looked at her, eyes raw with regret. So I kept it, hidden, like your freedom. Tears spilled down her cheeks. Why give it to me now? Because I don't want to own anything that belongs to you, he said. Not your time, not your choices, not even a memory. He stepped back. It's yours, fully, legally. No strings, no clauses, just yours. She stared at the key, cool, small, heavy with meaning. You could have kept it, she said. No one would have known. I'm tired of secrets, he replied. They're just cages with pretty locks. A long silence stretched between them, filled only by the wind in the trees. Then Clara closed the box and held it.